Welcome to Picks on Politics, everybody. I am Dan Manarino, and with midterm elections just under 4 months away, conversations continue to swirl in the Democratic Party about the rise of more left-wing candidates, particularly those in New York City backed by Mayor Zohran Mamdani. Among those creating the most talk is Darializa Avila Chevalier, who pulled off an upset against popular Congressman Adriano Espaillat in New York's 13th congressional district. In addition to proving herself in the Democratic Party, I spoke to her earlier this week about the road ahead as she now goes on the record. And Ms. Avila Chevalier is joining me now. Welcome back to Picks on Politics.
Thanks for having me.
And congratulations on the win.
Thank you so much.
Let's begin with your thoughts kind of overall on the win, right? Because it's not every day that a newcomer defeats an incumbent in a district. You were able to do that and defeat Adriano Espaillat. What do you attribute that to?
You know, I'm so deeply grateful and honored to have earned the support of so many people across this district, to know that we won the youth vote across all racial and ethnic backgrounds, that folks in Harlem, in particular black folks, came out and supported this campaign in a time where the Voting Rights Act is being gutted. And they decided that they wanted to have these values around making sure we have dignified housing, around making sure our tax dollars are coming in, investing in our children and not in wars abroad, and making sure that we are fighting back against the immigration enforcement that we're seeing across the country.
Yeah.
And I'm just so honored to everyone who was part of this campaign, and grateful to each and every one of them, because it was really the work of organizing that helped us get to where we are. I think so often we're told that entrenched power is untouchable, and to know that people came out and talked to their neighbors and helped build that people power to help us get across the finish line is what's so heartening to me.
It was a bit of a contentious race between the two of you. In the studio, we had a mini debate here in the studio, and it was a bit fiery and feisty at times, which is what we saw play out in the remaining weeks. Have you spoken to Mr. Espaillat since your win?
I have.
And how has that been?
It was positive. You know, I was very grateful that he offered to support with the transition, and so just grateful to be able to have that line of communication.
You know, endorsements were huge in this, and Mayor Mamdani, I spoke to him just this week, and I said, you know, people called you a kingmaker for what you did. He didn't want to take any attention away from the three of you, Claire Valdez and Brad Lander, who won as well, but he said he was happy to lend his support. Do you think the mayor had something to do with it?
You know, I'm very grateful for the mayor's support, and he is somebody for whom I canvassed, actually, early on in his primary. And what I saw was the way that he used it as a vehicle to empower people and to bring them back into their politics. And that was what I strove to do in my own campaign, and bring people back into the democracy that we are owed, right? And be part of building that. And so I was very grateful to have his support. I do think that it helped us reach more people, but I know that so many of our volunteers were the ones who really laid the groundwork by making sure that they were doing the work of talking to their neighbors, knocking on door after door, calling them, doing the 5-story walk-ups.
Yeah.
All of that is what really got us over the edge.
And the other big wins that night, of course, were Claire Valdez and Brad Lander. So how do you kind of see this, the three of you expected to win again in November and head to Washington? And people are calling it a mini coalition of sorts, right, heading to D.C. Have the three of you met, and do you consider yourself a coalition to head into D.C., and what will you bring? Yeah,
I'm very excited to work with both of them. I think they also have at the heart of their campaigns the working people of the city. And what we need is people in Washington who are going to fight for the working people across the country, making sure that the values that we hold, the values around making sure that our communities can lead dignified lives, and that working people have their rights protected around democracy, around, you know, being able to stay in their homes.
Yeah.
That, I think, is at the core of the fight that we're waging in Washington. I'm excited to fight with them. And
before I get to some issues, I want to ask you about other Democrats who were quick to react about what happened on primary night, right? For example, Josh Gottheimer was one of them. In the past, Tom Suozzi, a Democrat from Long Island, had said DSA should have their own party. What do you make of other Democrats now coming out and saying, well, this isn't representative of us as a whole?
Well, you know, I'm very excited to be the Democratic nominee. I'm very excited to know that the working people of this district voted for the things that we were running on, right, around affordable housing, around making sure that we were abolishing ICE, making sure that we're investing our tax dollars in our children here. And those are the values of the Democratic base, not only here in New York, but across the country. And we see that with election after election across the country, whether that was with Chris Rabb in Philadelphia, Dr. Hamaway in New Jersey, or with Melat Kiros in Denver, and there are so many more races like Donovan McKinney's in Michigan that I'm very excited to watch closely, and Justin Pearson's in Tennessee. I think what we're seeing is more and more Americans coming out to say this is what Democrats want.
But how do you envision yourself and what you view as your views? When I'm listening carefully, is it far off from the Democratic Party, or do you believe that they were outliers and shouldn't have said those things?
You know, I think the Democratic base, like so many, like myself included, felt abandoned by the establishment Democrats who have really been serving in many ways corporate interests instead of the working people of this country. And I think what the Democratic base is showing right now is that they want fighters who understand the struggle that they're going through and who are going to go to Washington and fight to make sure that we can lead dignified lives. Yeah. And, you know, I think for so many who I've yet to have conversations with, I just ask that they withhold judgment about who I am and the type of leadership that I bring to Washington until they've had a conversation with me.
I asked you when you were here for the mini debate of Hakeem Jeffries should be Speaker, and you said it was too early because you were focused on the race. The race is over. Should he be Speaker?
You know, I'm still working to build out, you know, the structures of co-governance that I'm so excited to model for others across the country, but for this district in particular, and to have those conversations with the community, because I think the first vote that I make will set the tone for the kind of leadership that this district will have, and I want to make sure that I'm making that vote with the considerations of the community in mind.
Have you spoken to him?
So I've spoken to many people who are in Washington right now, and I'm just very grateful for those conversations. But
him in particular, you're already a politician. You know, not answering the question. Did you speak to him in particular?
So I have not spoken to him yet, but I've spoken to a number of folks across, you know, the party, and I'm just very excited to work with so many.
Let me ask you overall kind of on some of these issues. Of course, Israel was a big one. One of your staunchest positions in this campaign was against Israel and what they're doing in Gaza. You called it a genocide. So when you go to D.C., is it something you want to bring up right away? And how do you kind of envision that playing out?
You know, there are a number of bills that I'll sign on to on day one, and one of them is the Block the Bombs Act, because I do believe that what's happening is a genocide, and I believe that it's a moral injury to the American people that our tax dollars are being used to enact this genocide. And so I think that this plays out in every single policy decision that we will make, right? If you value life, that is going to reflect in how you think about health policy. That's going to play out in how you think about housing. It's going to play out in how you think about childcare. And so if you cannot stand against a genocide, right, it makes me wonder whether you can stand for the things that working people in this country need, whether that's healthcare, housing, a Green New Deal. All of those things are deeply important to the American people.
And housing is a huge one here locally, of course, in New York City. And there was a study that came out this week that New York City is more expensive than ever. And people were really hoping for the mayor to change that. He's 6 months in. Many people saying give him a chance. How can Congress get involved in kind of bringing down the cost of housing? How would you do so specifically for folks in your district?
You know, one of the other bills that I'm really excited to sign on to on day one is the Tenant Rights to Organize Act, because currently only NYCHA residents have the federally protected right to organize. And we know that when folks have the right to organize, they are more likely to receive a response from their landlords on repairs. They are less likely to get evicted, and we are protecting folks from experiencing homelessness, making sure that we are also funding and reinvesting in NYCHA, fighting for a Green New Deal for public housing so that we can decarbonize and give NYCHA residents the upgrades that they deserve. And that will also revitalize our economy, making sure that we are bringing jobs to folks who have been underemployed or unemployed for far too long. And, you know, I think there are so many things that we can be doing on every level of government, and I'm excited to work with both the city and state to make sure that we are providing dignified and affordable housing. Yeah.
Early on, I hope to talk to you many times between now and, of course, November and then January as well. If I put you on the spot, I asked the mayor this week, I'm going to ask you the same thing. What's the summer song of 2026? I can't seem to figure it out.
I also can't figure it out. My way here, I was listening to Spice Girls, so it's not exactly new music.
Oh, wow. Real, he said Waka Waka. You're going even further back with Spice Girls. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.